Presentation Design 1 and Presentation Design 2. In Presentation Design 1, we basically do learn basic graphic design, so two-dimensional design, going through a process of also building your understanding of InDesign. But it's not InDesign class. InDesign, you can just take Lynda tutorials. Does everybody know that Lynda tutorials are available to you for free now through UT? So if you want any tutorial, go to Lynda. I have the information, but I don't know it off the top of my head. But you can link to UT, and we now have access to all the Lynda tutorials, and that includes all the Adobe programs, but also Revit and AutoCAD, I think, and other types of programs I can't use. What I'm going to do today is kind of a series of things, beginning with kind of talking about things that you need to think about and what you need to do to design a successful portfolio. Just so that you can begin to wrap your heads around it and begin to think about how do you even start to do a portfolio. After that, if I have time, I'm going to kind of give you a very brief setting up document in InDesign and a very brief scaling in Photoshop before we go over to room 103B, where I have tons of portfolios set up for you to look at, and also stationary systems that I have for you to look at, because you're going to, for Career Day, need to do a resume and hand in a resume, and you're also going to need to do like project pages. And I have some examples of those. I know Tim is doing something about the cover letters and also about resumes, but this is more just kind of, looking at the design of them, right? So, a lot of them work with portfolios that have been designed in my class, because my second class, Presentation Design 2, we do portfolio design. So my students in that class are working on that right now. Also, just since I'm standing here and can give a plug, I am also taking students to Florence in May for a May term. Deb Smerler, who teaches graphic design in the School of Art, and I are taking people for a trip that is photography and collage. So it's called Visual Explorations Florence. And we did it before one time, and it was such a blast that we're very excited that we get to do it again. So, let's begin. So some things to consider when you're designing a book. Okay, are you going to use your stationery system as a complementary piece to your book? Do you have a stationery system? What are the ways you might use a stationery system? It could be as simple as picking up the color that's in your stationery system and moving that into your portfolio. My blouse is attacking me. Or it could be using the type, the font that you used on your stationery system within your book. Or it could be using the font that you used for your name, just as your name, your logo type for your name. So it could be used in a lot of different ways. I'm going to show you sort of a couple of extreme ways people have used their stationery systems. But the point of it is, how can your whole package work together? That's what you want. You want your portfolio and all of your other pieces to work together in some way, to be cohesive. Okay, so what shape or format should your book be? Is it a square? Is it a vertical? Is it a horizontal? Is it large? Is it small? This is something that you need to consider, and part of that is thinking about the work that you're going to put into it. I doubt that any landscape architects want to have, a vertical book. Just because when you look at your images are very, very horizontal, right? But think about your work and think about how can your work be on a page and be at a good scale for us to see the work. It's all about seeing the work, right? If your book's so small you can't see the work, then it's not a good portfolio, however lovely it looks, right? Because it's all about seeing that work. Okay, and what size should your book be? So I've already discussed that. So let me just show you Julie Moore's portfolio, because here she's using, this is her logo. It's like an abstracted J and M, so Julie Moore. So that's her logo. So you enter the book, and then you have the table of contents, right? It's all abstracting from that logo to begin with. Here is her divider page. So she has an architecture section, a graphic design section, some other section, whatever section she has. This is architecture. And these are the 4 projects that she has in architecture and the name of those projects. Then when you get to a project page, so the initial page of your project, which needs to be very cohesively designed with the rest of your book, right? So the next project page should have the same type of visual language, right? So you understand I've come to the next project. She's using this kind of coded bar system. So these are all the projects in her book. These are the projects she has in architecture. And then she just moves this, you'll see as I move through, she just moves this dot through. So see, we have in the next project page, we know we're there, it has the same visual language. Another project, I'm not showing you obviously all of her work, all of her portfolio. Now, her graphic design section, you see she had 2 things. She has the same visual language on her, as her other divider pages, and she's using the same system. Now, this kind of treatment could be really, really boring, right, when you use the same system, but in this instance, it's just, you know, very clean, very refined. It's the last page of her book in the inside cover. Okay, so what you need in your book is you need a lot of similarity, a lot of consistency within variety, right? If everything's the same, it's going to like be a big snooze, right? Snooze fest. But if it has a push and pull between the pages, you know, you have something that's heavy, then something that's light, then something that's a small amount of color, then something a larger amount of color. When you move through back and forth, that will, you know, keep the viewer engaged. So what number of columns do you have to work with? Create a column structure for your book. Okay, so this is critically important. I cannot stress, over and over, cannot stress how critically important it is that you have a grid on your page. And that's not a grid that you're pulling from the guidelines. You're pulling them down from the guidelines. This is columns, and if you want, rows. Right? Rows go horizontally and columns go vertically. The reason that you don't want to start, you know, you have a square and you want a whole bunch of squares inside and that's your grid. The reason that gives you a lot of problems is because you need space between your columns, space between your image and your text, right? You always need spaces around, and those spaces around and between things should be even. So that when you have images, they should basically, when they're close together, be the same kind of space as 2 pages ago that you're using. It shouldn't just flip all around, right? And how many columns you can have is very dependent on what size your book is, right? You have a very narrow book, you can have a 1-column grid, basically, right? You have a wider book, you can have 2-column grid, 3-column grid. What it's dependent on is the narrower you get your column, the the harder it is to work with your type, right? So the smaller the column, you can see that in a newspaper, right? Type looks hideous. Smaller, 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 smaller kind of column. That column is very difficult to work with for your type to make it look beautiful, especially if you're doing what you want to do, most of you, which is to have justified type, right? Most people like to align their type in architecture, right? Have it aligned on both sides. So that's very difficult to do. The shorter your measure, the distance of that, the width of that column, the harder it is for you to justify your type and make it look good. So one thing that's consistent throughout any book that you will see is that you have margins. Don't forget your margins. You have margins that go all the way around your page, and you have column structure. The default on the column structure is 0.1667. That is a great amount of space. Have a reason for changing that amount of space when you're setting up your columns. I mean, you may have great reason, but just have a reason, because that is a nice, optically beautiful distance between columns. Okay, and go ahead and give yourself. Just start this way. Trust me. Trust me, please. Give yourself a 1/2 inch margin all the way around. Right? Give yourself a 1/2 inch here, a 1/2 inch, a 1/2 inch, and give yourself a 1/2 inch. Now, the spine, the distance in the spine, that's dependent on your binding, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But on the edges, give yourself a 1/2 inch. There are many reasons to do that. One is that when you're binding your book, it can get cut off on that right hand and top, bottom, left to make all the pages even, right? And then you're cutting off part of that. Give it a nice amount of space. Right? Don't put something right next to that edge either. Okay. You also have room for your page numbers. Page numbers fall inside the margin, not up into here. So, well, you know, in the margin, not into the text. So that's just giving you a lot of nice room. You can use columns in very, very complex ways, but the normal way is that you would have either a 2-column or 3-column grid on your page most of the time, and you vary on top of that grid. Okay, so this is exact same grid. This is a 3-column grid. But you can see that you can use those columns in a variety of ways. Right? That's using the same grid but in a different way. So they're kind of indicating that the black would be image and the other would be text. Now in your portfolio, you're probably not going to have a ton of text, right? But probably just on one page where you have very much text. Your initial project page. But it's moving around on that grid. And when you're moving around on a grid, do you always have to align to the grid? If the question is about text, yeah, probably. But if the question is about an image, maybe not. If you have an image that has edges that kind of, open out, right? A lot of renderings might have that. It kind of bleeds into the negative space, or if you have things that have a shape that's not a square or a rectangle, then very well you can just look at it optically on the page and move it around so that it looks good. You don't always have to adhere to this. Also, a 3-column grid, see if this confuses you, but a 3-column grid is also a 6-column grid. Right? This is the same grid. So maybe you're always using the 3-column grid for your text, but you have that underlying 6-column grid, and maybe an image comes across, and it comes across, 1.5 columns. This will still look balanced, right? You're seeing that other grid. So a 4-column grid is also, 2-column grid is also a 4-column grid. It's also an 8-column grid. It's, it's like working in modules, which you do, right? Okay, So what type of binding will your book have? The type of binding determines how much space you allow in the spine. That's the center of the book. So you have a lot of options. Try not for ones that look cheap, right? Don't go with a cheap looking binding. Most bindings don't cost very much money to have bound. Not really. One that works really well is saddle stitching. A saddle stitch book is a stapled book, right? And when you staple your book, it looks very clean. It might seem like that might look cheap, but it doesn't. It looks really clean. So when you go over to look at all these books that I have out, you look at their bindings, right? So a saddle stitch book, when you can't do a saddle stitch book is when you have too many pages, right? If you get beyond 60, 65 pages, that's too thick, especially if you have any weight to those pages. When you have a saddle stitch book, I don't know whose this is, but when you have a saddle stitch book, it is like this, right? And the staples are right here. So the more you put into the spine, the more and more and more pages, the thicker this is, right? And that thickness actually ends up out here, and it's whacked off, right? Put it all together as a little triangle sticking out here, whacked off, ½ inch margin. Help you out a lot there. You can also, and you'll see in some of those examples, you can also have a saddle stitch, but with a flat spine. You can actually ask them to flatten that spine so that it looks sort of perfect bound. A perfect bound book is not there. It's on the next page. Okay, so this up here, the Kinko's circle plastic thing, please don't do that. That horrifies me, okay? Okay, none of this. This is, you can get at graphic services. There's graphic creations, there's graphic services. Graphic services is on campus, right? Graphic services, note, graphic services is not the image center. It is not a copy place. Well, you can do copies. But anyway, you can't rush in there and beg for them to do something for you right that minute. It's just not how it works, okay? This is something, a couple of days beforehand, you take the portfolio, and a couple of days later, you go pick it up. All right, but if you want a portfolio printed and bound and you want it to look good, go there. They have just gotten a brand new digital press that's probably the length of all these chairs. It's beautiful. But they can do wire, and wire comes in a lot of different colors, but the ones that are always there are like, you know, black and maybe white. I don't know, but black. Okay, black wire in the middle of a book can, you know, as lovely as it may look on the outside, just think about it. So when you pick up the wire-bound books there, just go look, the wire O-bound books. Look at the spine when you look on the inside, okay? Because black's really dark, right, on the inside. White disappears because the pages are white. And silver is sort of in between those two. You know, it has color to it, but it's not real dark. So when you're thinking about that, make sure if you want to bind that you tell the image center that you would like to bind in a certain color before you take the book there, because they may or may not have it, right? And they may be able to get it. Okay, this is called a case-bound book. It's like a regular book, right? One that is sewn into like a regular hardback book. That is, there are a lot of different separate signatures that are sewn into the back, and then it's taped, and then the hardcover is put over it. You can make a hardback book, but you have to gasp and pray and all kinds of things for the very, very last part of it, because you can completely screw up your book in the very last move of your book, because you have to flip it over. When you flip it over, It's up to the gods. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. Uh-oh. Okay, somehow 2 slides are missing, so I will describe them. Okay, the next one would be a perfect bound book. A perfect bound book is a glued book. So all the pages are together like this. They glue this side and they wrap the cover around it, right? The difference between a saddle stitched book, well, there are a couple of differences, but the saddle stitched book and a perfect bound book is a perfect bound book and a wire O book, both of them, open flat, right, completely flat. A perfect bound book does not open flat, so it's bent up. So look at that difference. Matt Barnett just did a perfect bound book. There aren't very many over there. They look beautiful. Perfect bound books look beautiful, right? But you cannot have it down. So I kind of encourage people to have one that opens flat so that when you're interviewing, you can be pointing out things instead of them having it up in their hands. Because a perfect bound book, you actually have, it has to be up here so that they're holding it open.
You had said saddle stitch would stay flat?
That does.
Okay.
Saddle stitched, you know, you can put an image all the way across. Wire, you can put an image all the way across. Of course, you don't want to have really critical information in the middle, you know, where it's crossing over. You don't want, you know, the main part of your building is right there where it crosses over and the wire comes through. You know, be logical about it. But there are also a lot of hand bindings, Coptic binding, different kinds of stitching that will also open up flat. If you're going to graphic services, I'm going to say this before I forget, but if you're going to graphic services, then all you need to do is set up your page. This is for most things that you're going to print, okay? Do not get overly complicated. When you set up your InDesign document, which I may or may not get to talking to you today, but when you set up your InDesign document, just make sure that you start on page 1, right? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They can move all the pages around to be correct. So if you think about a saddle stitch book here, the cover and the back cover together, right? The inside cover and the back cover together, right? They go all the way through. It has to be divisible by 4 because this is 4 pages. This is 4 pages. Right, for them to, they can't have a separate page that just sticks out here. It'll just fall out of your book. Okay, how are you going to divide your book? Are you going to use a numbering system, project 1, project 2, etc.? Are they going to separate the work into sections, or are you going to, so is it going to be architecture or interior design or landscape architecture, sketching, study abroad, photography, furniture design, built, I don't know, whatever sections you think that you're going to want to have. Do you have 1 layer of division, or do you have 2 layers of division? So if you look at Dale's portfolio, you can see this is his logo. This one's from a really long time ago. That's his logo from on the right. And you can see that his logo is sort of set up so that it has text going through negative space, which he's using as a reference here for the way that he treats his divider pages. So that's his architecture and his graphic design dividers. Now when you're using color like this, using color is very scary, but when you're using color, think about how those colors work as a palette, okay? If you put those colors side by side, do they work side by side? They should, right? They shouldn't be one really dark color and one pastel color and then one neon color. Those do not work together. So you could see that green and blue really kind of spoke to each other. So he's dividing in sections, and then Bobby Tate is divided his portfolio into 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see that each time he has the same system. So this is his project page, okay? So this is a project. He always has a detail of one of his renderings. This bar moves across so that, don't set up your book so that you have to, you have some system that you have to move down this way as you go through the book or over this way as you go through the book. It's very confusing. You're going to have terrible negative space. It's just really confusing. Like you set up your table of contents and it does like this and you want to repeat that and you want to go down. It just gives you grief upon grief. Not worth it. So he has it so that it just slides over. So 3 will slide over next. I'll show you. This is the information about his project. So what information, I have this on a later scale, but slide. But what information do you need for each project? You need the title of the project, right? And then what is the other information that you think is critical? You probably need a couple of paragraphs of text. But this is like, what type of program is it? Where's the site? What studio was it done in? Right, so think about that. Graphically, that can be very beautiful. The name, your title, and then that secondary information that falls below your title. You can see there's a very narrow book and a 1-column grid. A 1-column grid plus bleeding off of the side. So his images were very small. So see 3 is just slid over, 4. You see he's still being able to vary that grid. Okay, so think about what are your strengths. How do you want to talk about your project when you're interviewing? You're going to start at your project page and then you're going to need to talk about it with the interviewer through. How do you want to do that? What are your strengths? You want to start with the big rendering, the final rendering, and then go back talking about the other. You want that dynamic piece, or do you want to start with sketching? It's all about sketching to you, right? Or do you want to start with the concept poem or quote? Or do you want to start with a party? How do you want to begin it? What shows you off the best, or a model? Okay, so the text for each project should include the name of the project's location, description of the project. In landscape architecture, definitely the scale of the project, but I think that's good for architecture too, if you have a variety of scale projects, to include the scale. How many square feet is it? Text could also include studio, professor, and the scale. And how much text do you want? Well, it completely depends on who you talk to. Actually, a lot of this depends on who you talk to, right? So this is just my opinion. But some people think a lot of text, have a lot of text, and if they read it, they read it. If they don't, they don't. Some people think you do not need more than 2 paragraphs of text max. Right? Should you have captions? Well, don't have a caption that says section. I think they can look at it and tell it is a section. But if you have caption information that gives the viewer more information, certainly include captions. Okay, so this is Catherine's. And you can see that this is her project page. She had really nice renderings. She just happened to have really long, nice renderings, kind of consistently. So she did this. She moved them down to just seeing part of that rendering. She always has her text in these 2 columns. She always has the name of her project and then her secondary information below. So that we can go through her book and we can get to the next project and we know Yes, that is the next project. She did a great job, I think, working on her grid. Each one of her pages were quite different. I've narrowed this, what I'm showing you down. Actually, I just deleted some stuff. This is Katie O'Connor's, or Connell's. This is her logo, O, with a little. And can you see she created a pattern? This is like the first, this is the inside cover, first page, I think. Oh no, that was the cover and then the back cover. This is the inside cover, first page. So how do you enter the book is a good question to ask yourself, right? You have the cover, right? You open up the book. The left page there is the inside cover. You usually don't put a lot of information on the inside cover. You might design the inside cover, right, as she has. You may put your contact information on the inside cover. But normally you don't start the book on the inside cover, right? You don't start by having a table of contents across the inside cover to the next page. A lot of times the first page is an introduction to yourself, right? Please put your name in your portfolio and your contact information. Some people want to put their resume in their portfolio. I definitely advise against it. The reason I advise against it is because your resume changes all the time, right? I do have a beautiful, gorgeous portfolio over there that's in leather. It's the only one that's leather. He actually got a tutorial, signed up to apprentice for a month to learn how to make that book. It's debossed, all leather. Yeah. If you're going to do something fancy, it has to be perfect. This is perfect, and the book's beautiful. It is gorgeous. But here's a table of contents. So you would enter the book, introduction to yourself, next page, next spread would be your table of contents. You can tell that we're dealing in spreads here, right? We're dealing with both pages. So don't start designing on single pages unless you're going to do a flip book or, like give them cards or something. You're designing both pages across. Okay, this is her divider page, architecture. And then this is how she starts her project pages with a parti. And you can see that she's doing, she basically has selected a palette. It's this one very bright green and gray, black and grays. I don't think she used her top row enough, personally, but it's really a beautiful book. You can see she really has room to use that. Yeah, everything looks like it's slid down, right? You don't want that. It's still beautiful. Beautiful chair. It's comfortable too. Yeah, take good pictures of things that you make, right? Can you see that's outside with that beautiful wall behind it? Very clean, very simple. Don't take a nasty photo with a drop cloth underneath and, with a lot of other information behind it. Just solemn. So here is one of her graphic design projects for Tast. And then the end of her book. Brennan had, his logo had bars, so he took that bar idea. That was the cover, this is the inside cover, first page. And this is what his project pages look like. So the rendering goes 3/4 all the way across. Yeah, like, I'm going to say this later too, but how many things are on that page? 2, right? On that spread, 2 things. Don't overcrowd your pieces. Don't make them so small we cannot see them. You see this and you can take some time and you can see it. It's at a great scale. we're working with something that's heavy at the top but smaller, right? And lighter at the bottom but larger. So they balance on that page. So you can see how these are flipping around. It's using the exact same grid, but it's just that they are using it in different ways, so it keeps it interesting as you move through. Margot is very interested in sketching, so hers is really based on sketching. These are her divider pages for each project. She has concept sketches and a quote. See, I said please. And then this is the next page. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between these two things, but this is always how the first page after that concept sketch looks for each project. This is a beautiful piece, and this is what I'm talking about. This isn't necessarily fitting into the grid exactly. It doesn't have to fall on that line. You look at negative space going around it, and how big does it need to be? Just move it so that it looks optically right. And she also used this color palette as her ground in each instance. And that was her stationary system, which was just a little book. So she was very hands. So Jesse Hewitt's, that was his logo. Just going to move a little more quickly. How am I doing? I can never tell how much time it is. Oh my goodness. Wait a minute. When did we start? 12:15. And we have till, what is it? Oh, fast. Fast. Okay, Kendra's fast. I have a few more comments. I'm getting to that. You can see these over there. No, I had no idea. I entertain myself. Okay. These books are over there, so I'm just going to the very last questions I have so I don't forget to tell you anything. You are welcome to see my, these portfolios if you make an appointment with me. There they are. Okay, how many projects should you show? The usual answer is around 6. But the main answer is do not show anything that you don't think this is awesome. If you don't think it's really good, then probably you should take it out of your book. But I would ask an architectural professor. What I would do is say, I am thinking about using these projects, and then see what they say. I usually, in my exhibits, I usually say, if you had to take out one photograph, which one would it be? Because that takes them off the hook, you know. So, you know, if you had to take out a project, which one would it be? If 2 or 3 professors take the same project, take that one out. How many images should I show for the project? Well, just enough to make us understand the project, right? Just don't overwhelm. You don't have to show everything you did for that project. And make sure that when you're showing the project, you don't show the exact same thing in different ways, like you have a sketch of it from this angle, and then you have a rendering of it from this angle, and then you have a photo of the model from that angle. Just, you know, choose one of those. And in what order should I arrange the projects? This is my best advice. This is the advice that I use for my own portfolio. If you had 5 projects, look at them. Put your best project first. Okay? Put your second best project last, and put your third best project in the middle. That way you're moving through, right? You like hit them with your best shot, and then you end on a high note too, right? So I argue against going for, you know, like first year, second year, third year, fourth, you know, like you don't want to start low. I argue against, you know, adding anything in there. Oh, and if you you think this rendering's not good enough, then please, you have more experience now, redo it. Right? Don't put anything bad in it. All right, that's it. You need to go over to 103B, or you don't have any time left to. So I didn't get a lot of time to show you all